They call it the moment everything changes. For William Shaw, that moment came on a Tuesday morning in Vista Point, Idaho, when he saw a young woman being forced into a van by three men who had no idea they were about to make the biggest mistake of their lives. William looked like just another broke construction worker trying to keep the lights on for his 12-year-old daughter. But buried beneath years of suppressed memories and unpaid bills was something Ruslan Petrov's trafficking organization couldn't have anticipated. A former Navy SEAL whose protective instincts would explode back to life the second they threatened his child. What started as one father's desperate attempt to help Crystal Wade escape her captors became a week-long war in a quiet mountain town where military training met criminal ruthlessness, where a man running from his past discovered it was exactly what he needed to fight for his future, and where the phrase "wrong person to mess with" took on a whole new meaning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock beside William Shaw's bed showed 5:47 a.m. when it started its shrill announcement that another day of struggle was about to begin. He rolled over on the thin mattress, his back protesting from years of construction work and nights spent on furniture that had seen better decades. The apartment around him told the story of a man barely keeping his head above water, peeling wallpaper that he couldn't afford to replace, a kitchen table with one wobbly leg propped up by phone books, and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly. Because the motor was dying, William sat up slowly, running his hands through dark hair that was starting to show grey at 38. His reflection in the cracked mirror across the room showed a man who looked older than his years, with lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights worrying about bills, and too many days pushing his body beyond its limits just to make ends meet. The scars on his chest and arms were mostly hidden under his work shirts, reminders of a past life that felt like it belonged to someone else entirely. "Dad?" The voice came from the doorway, soft and concerned. Sage Shaw stood there in her pajamas, her dark hair messy from sleep, clutching a stuffed rabbit that had been her companion since she was 5. At 12, she was starting to look more like her mother every day, which brought William both joy and a sharp pang of loss that never quite went away. "Hey there, kiddo," William said, managing a smile that was more genuine than most people got from him these days. "You're up early." "I heard the alarm and wanted to make sure you were okay," Sage said, stepping into the room. She had this way of looking at him that made William feel like she could see right through whatever brave face he was trying to put on. It was both comforting and terrifying to be loved that completely by someone. William stood up and walked over to her, placing his hands gently on her shoulders. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just another day at the construction site. You know the drill." But Sage's expression didn't change. She had inherited her mother's ability to read people, and at 12, she was already too good at seeing through her father's attempts to shield her from their financial reality. "Dad, I heard you on the phone last night with the electric company. Are we going to lose the lights again?" The question hit William like a punch to the gut. He had tried so hard to keep these conversations away from Sage's ears, but their apartment was small and the walls were thin. Last month they had spent 3 days without electricity until William managed to scrape together enough money for a partial payment. He had told Sage it was an adventure like camping indoors, but she was getting too old for those kinds of explanations. "We're going to be fine," William said, and he meant it, even if he wasn't entirely sure how he was going to make it true. "I've got some overtime lined up this week, and Mrs. Henderson next door said she might have some odd jobs for me to do around her place. We'll make it work." Sage nodded, but William could see the worry in her eyes. She was 12 years old and already carrying burdens that no child should have to think about. It made something fierce and protective rise up in his chest, the same feeling that had once made him one of the most effective soldiers the Navy SEALs had ever trained. "Go get ready for school," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I'll make us some breakfast." The kitchen was barely big enough for 2 people, but William moved through it with the efficiency of someone who had learned to make the most of limited resources. He scrambled the last 3 eggs in the refrigerator, toasted bread that was a day past its prime, and poured orange juice that had been watered down to make it last longer. It wasn't much, but it was what they had. Sage appeared 15 minutes later, dressed in jeans that were getting too short and a sweater that she had worn 3 times this week already. William made a mental note to check the thrift stores this weekend, though he knew his budget wouldn't stretch far enough for much. "Dad," Sage said as she sat down at the wobbly table, "Jenny's mom is looking for someone to fix their back deck. I told her you were really good at that stuff." William smiled at his daughter's unwavering faith in his abilities. "Thanks for the recommendation, kiddo. I'll give Mrs. Patterson a call after work." They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from 2 people who have learned to be a complete family even when pieces are missing. William watched Sage carefully eat every bite on her plate, and he pushed half of his eggs onto her plate when she wasn't looking. "I can walk to school today," Sage said as they finished eating. "You don't have to drive me." William was already shaking his head before she finished the sentence. "Nice try, but I'm driving you. It's on my way to the job site anyway." This was only partially true. The construction site where William worked was actually 15 minutes in the opposite direction from Sage's school, but he would never admit that to her. These morning drives were often the best part of his day. 10 minutes when they could talk about her classes or her friends or whatever random thoughts were bouncing around in her 12-year-old mind. The truck that William drove was almost as old as Sage herself. A Ford pickup that had seen better decades, but still ran reliably enough to get them where they needed to go. The passenger seat had a tear in the vinyl that William had covered with duct tape, and the radio only picked up 2 stations clearly, but it was theirs and it was paid for. As they drove through the streets of Vista Point, William looked out at the town that had become their home 3 years ago. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, where the mountains provided a stunning backdrop for a community that moved at its own pace. The cost of living was lower than the big cities, which was why William had moved here after leaving the military, but jobs were scarce and the pay was never quite enough. "Dad, can I ask you something?" Sage said as they stopped at a red light. "You can ask me anything, sweetheart. You know that." Sage was quiet for a moment, looking out the window at a group of high school students waiting at a bus stop. "Do you ever miss being in the Navy?" The question caught William off guard. Sage rarely asked about his military service, and he had never shared many details about what his life had been like before she was born. The official story was that he had served his time, done his duty, and decided to start a family. The truth was considerably more complicated. "Sometimes," William said carefully, "I miss some of the people I served with, good men who became like brothers to me, but I don't miss being away from you and your mom for months at a time." This was true, as far as it went. What William didn't say was that he also didn't miss the nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way his hands would shake sometimes when he heard certain sounds. He didn't miss the weight of decisions that had life and death consequences, or the way violence had become as natural to him as breathing. "Were you ever scared?" Sage asked. William considered the question as the light turned green, and they continued toward her school. "Yeah, kiddo. I was scared sometimes. Being scared doesn't make you weak. It just means you understand that what you're doing matters." They pulled up in front of Vista Point Middle School, a modest brick building that served students from all over the rural county. William watched as kids streamed toward the entrance, backpacks slung over shoulders, voices carrying the excitement and drama that seemed to define middle school existence. "Have a good day at school," William said, leaning over to give Sage a hug. "I'll pick you up at 3, okay?" "Okay, Dad." Sage gathered her backpack and opened the truck door, then paused. "Dad, I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you'll ever know." William watched until Sage disappeared through the school's front doors, then sat in his truck for another minute, just looking at the building. This was what mattered. This was what he was fighting for every day, every overtime hour, every ache in his back, and every bill that kept him awake at night. Sage deserved better than what he could give her right now, but he was going to keep working until he could provide it. The construction site was a 20-minute drive from the school, located on the outskirts of town, where a new subdivision was slowly taking shape. William had been working for Miller Construction for 8 months now, ever since his previous job at the lumberyard had ended when the company downsized. The pay was decent when there was work to be had, but construction in a mountain town was seasonal and unpredictable. Frank Miller was already on site when William arrived, a clipboard in his hand and a frown on his weather-beaten face. Frank was the kind of boss who demanded hard work but was fair with his employees, and he had been patient with William during the learning curve of transitioning from military service to civilian construction work. "Sure," Frank called out as William grabbed his tool belt from the truck. "I need you on the Henderson house today. They want the kitchen framing finished before the inspector comes through tomorrow." William nodded and headed toward the partially completed house that would eventually be home to some family lucky enough to afford new construction. The work was physical and demanding, requiring focus and precision, which suited William perfectly. When his hands were busy and his mind was occupied with measurements and angles, there was less room for the memories that sometimes tried to surface. The morning passed quickly as William lost himself in the rhythm of construction work. The repetitive motions of measuring, cutting, and securing boards provided a kind of meditation that helped quiet the restless energy that still lived in his chest, even 4 years after leaving the military. It was just after 11 o'clock when William stepped outside to grab more materials from his truck. The street in front of the construction site was quiet, except for the occasional car passing by, and William was thinking about whether he could afford to buy Sage new school clothes this weekend when he saw the van. It was parked across the street, a dark blue vehicle with tinted windows that seemed out of place in the residential area. What caught William's attention wasn't the van itself, but the way the 3 men standing beside it were behaving. Their body language was tense, alert, and they kept looking around in a way that William recognized from his military training as surveillance behavior. Then he saw the young woman. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Crystal Wade was fighting. Even from across the street, William could see that the blonde woman was not going willingly toward the van. She was maybe 24, dressed in jeans and a college sweatshirt, and she was putting up more resistance than the 3 men had apparently expected. One of them had her by the arm, trying to drag her forward, while another kept looking around nervously to see if anyone was watching. William's first instinct was to look away. In the years since leaving the military, he had trained himself to avoid confrontation, to keep his head down and focus on his own problems. He had Sage to think about, bills to pay, and a life to rebuild. Getting involved in other people's troubles was a luxury he couldn't afford, but as he watched, the man holding Crystal's arm twisted it behind her back in a way that made her cry out in pain. The sound cut through the morning air and hit William like a physical blow. Suddenly, he wasn't standing outside a construction site in Vista Point, Idaho. He was back in places where predators hurt the innocent and good people looked the other way because it was safer. "Help me!" Crystal's voice carried across the street, desperate and terrified. "Somebody help me!" The three men were clearly agitated now. The one who seemed to be in charge, a thick-set man with dark hair, was speaking rapidly in what sounded like Russian. The second man, younger and nervous, kept scanning the street while the third continued trying to force Crystal toward the open van door. William found himself moving before he had consciously made the decision. His tool belt hit the ground as he crossed the street, his stride purposeful and direct. The years of civilian life seemed to fall away with each step, replaced by training that had been drilled into him until it became instinct. "Hey!" William called out when he was still 20 feet away. "Let her go!" The three men turned toward him, and William immediately read the situation in their faces and posture. These weren't random criminals or opportunistic attackers. They moved with the coordination of people who worked together regularly, and the way they positioned themselves told William they had done this before. The man in charge stepped forward, his hand moving toward something under his jacket. "Walk away, friend. This is not your business." His English was heavily accented, confirming William's suspicion that he had heard Russian earlier. The man was probably in his 40s, with the kind of build that suggested he stayed in shape for professional reasons rather than personal health. "The lady asked for help," William said, continuing to move closer. "That makes it my business." Crystal was still struggling, but her eyes had found William's face, and he could see hope flickering there along with the fear. "Please," she said. "They're trying to take me somewhere. I don't know them." The younger man, who couldn't have been more than 25, was clearly getting nervous about the public nature of this confrontation. "Dmitri," he said to the leader, "we need to go. Now." Dmitri kept his eyes on William, sizing him up. William recognized the look. It was the way predators evaluated potential threats. What Dmitri saw was a construction worker in his late 30s, probably tired from a morning of manual labor, maybe soft from years of civilian life. What Dmitri couldn't see was the way William had automatically positioned himself to have multiple escape routes, the way his weight was balanced for quick movement, or the fact that his seemingly relaxed hands were actually positioned for maximum effectiveness if violence became necessary. "Last chance," Dmitri said. "Walk away." "Let her go," William repeated. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it that made Crystal stop struggling and stare at him. Even through her fear, she could sense that something had changed. In the dynamic of the confrontation, the third man, who had been holding Crystal, suddenly shoved her hard toward the van while Dmitri reached under his jacket. William moved instantly, covering the distance between them in 3 quick steps. His left hand caught Dmitri's wrist before the gun could clear its holster, while his right drove into the man's solar plexus with enough force to double him over. The younger man reached for his own weapon, but William was already turning, using Dmitri's body as leverage to deliver a kick that caught the second attacker in the knee and sent him sprawling onto the pavement. The gun skittered away across the asphalt. Crystal had broken free and was running, but the third man caught her again before she could get clear. William could see her terror and determination warring in her face as she fought against her captor's grip. "Run!" William shouted to her. "Get to the construction site and call the police!" But even as he spoke, William realized that more men were emerging from the van. This wasn't just a 3-person operation. There were at least 5 of them, and they were better organized than he had initially thought. Dmitri was straightening up, his face twisted with pain and rage. "You have no idea what you have done," he gasped. "Who you are dealing with." "Enlighten me," William said, keeping his position between the attackers and Crystal. 2 more men had flanked around the van, and William quickly assessed the new odds. 5 against 1, probably all armed, and at least one of them professionally trained. In his SEAL days, these would have been manageable numbers, but that was when he had backup, superior equipment, and the element of surprise. Now, he had a 12-year-old daughter who needed her father to come home every night. "Crystal," William called, without taking his eyes off the men in front of him. "Can you get to that house?" He nodded toward the construction site where Frank Miller was probably wondering why his employee had suddenly disappeared. "I think so," Crystal called back. She was pressed against a parked car, trying to use it as cover. "On my signal, you run. Don't look back, don't stop. Get inside and call 911. Dmitri had recovered enough to straighten up completely, and his hand was moving toward his jacket again. "You think you are hero?" he asked William. "You think you save the day like in movies?" "I think I'm a guy who doesn't like seeing women get hurt," William replied. "Apparently that makes me different from you." The standoff stretched for several seconds, both sides calculating odds and possibilities. William could feel the familiar tension in his muscles, the way his breathing had automatically shifted to the controlled rhythm he had learned in training. Part of him was surprised at how easily the old reflexes had returned. Dmitri suddenly smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "You want to play hero? Fine. But understand, this does not end here. We know this town. We know who lives here. We will find you. Good luck with that," William said. Dmitri said something in Russian to his men, and they began moving toward the van. But William noticed that one of them was circling around trying to get an angle on Crystal. "Now!" William shouted. Crystal ran, sprinting toward the construction site with a speed born of desperation. The man trying to intercept her broke into a run as well, but William was already moving. He tackled the runner from behind, sending both of them crashing into the side of a parked pickup truck. The impact drove the air from William's lungs, but he managed to keep the other man from pursuing Crystal. Behind him, he could hear Dmitri shouting orders and the sound of van doors slamming. When William looked up, the van was pulling away from the curb with a screech of tires. Dmitri was in the passenger seat, and he made eye contact with William through the window. Even from a distance, William could read the promise in that stare. This wasn't over. William picked himself up from the pavement, checking automatically for injuries. His shoulder was going to be sore tomorrow, and he had scraped his hands on the truck's bumper, but nothing was serious. More importantly, Crystal was safe. He found her at the construction site, standing next to Frank Miller and speaking rapidly into a cell phone. When she saw William approaching, she ended the call and ran toward him. "Are you okay?" she asked, looking him up and down for signs of injury. "I called 911. The police are on their way." "I'm fine," William said. "What about you? Did they hurt you?" Crystal shook her head, but William could see that she was shaking. The adrenaline was wearing off now, leaving behind the full reality of what had almost happened to her. Frank Miller approached them, his expression grim. "Sure. What the hell was that about? Who were those guys?" "I don't know," William said, which was mostly true. He had suspicions, but no concrete information. "I just saw them trying to force her into a van." "Human traffickers," Crystal said quietly. Both men turned to look at her. "That's what they were. I've been investigating disappearances of young women in this area. I think I got too close to something they didn't want me to find." Frank's expression darkened. "Human trafficking? Here in Vista Point?" "It's everywhere," Crystal said. "Small towns, big cities. They target vulnerable women, especially ones without strong support systems or ones who won't be missed right away." William studied Crystal's face, noting the way she spoke about the subject with knowledge that went beyond casual research. "You said you were investigating. Are you a cop?" "Criminal justice major at the community college," Crystal explained. "But I've been doing research for a paper on human trafficking patterns in rural areas. When my roommate Jessica disappeared, 3 months ago, I started looking deeper into similar cases. The sound of sirens was getting closer, and William could see a police cruiser turning onto their street. He felt a familiar tightness in his chest at the thought of giving statements and answering questions about his background. "Crystal," he said, "when the police get here, just tell them what happened. Don't mention anything about my military service unless they specifically ask." She looked at him curiously. "Why?" "Because I'm trying to build a quiet life for my daughter," William said, "and getting involved in situations like this isn't part of that plan." But even as he spoke the words, William knew it was too late for that kind of thinking. Dimitri's parting threat had been clear. They would find him. And if they could find him, they could find Sage. The police cruiser pulled up to the construction site, followed by a second car. 2 officers got out, and William recognized one of them, Officer Martinez, who had helped him navigate the paperwork when he had enrolled Sage in school 3 years ago. "Mr. Shaw," Martinez called out as he approached, "we got a call about an attempted abduction?" "That's right," William said. "These men were trying to force this young woman into a van. She managed to get away." As Crystal began telling her story to the officers, William found himself scanning the street automatically, looking for signs of surveillance or return visits. The van was long gone, but that didn't mean the threat had ended. Frank Miller was standing beside him, still looking shaken by the morning's events. "Shaw," he said quietly, "where did you learn to fight like that? That wasn't construction worker stuff." William met his boss's eyes, seeing genuine concern there along with curiosity. "I served in the Navy for 8 years, he said. "Some habits die hard." This was technically true, though it left out the more significant details about which part of the Navy and what kind of training he had received. Frank nodded, apparently satisfied with the explanation, but William knew that the simple days of construction work and quiet evenings with Sage were probably over. Dimitri's threat hadn't been idle, and men like that didn't make empty promises. Somehow, without meaning to, William had stepped back into a world he had spent 4 years trying to leave behind. Detective Valentina Santos arrived at the construction site 40 minutes after the initial call, driving an unmarked sedan that had seen better years. William watched her emerge from the car with the purposeful stride of someone who had been dealing with serious crimes long enough to recognize their patterns. She was probably in her mid-30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "I'm Detective Santos," she said, approaching the group. "I understand we had an attempted abduction this morning." Officer Martinez nodded toward Crystal, who was sitting on the tailgate of Williams' truck with a blanket around her shoulders. "Miss Wade here says she was grabbed by 3 men trying to force her into a van. Mr. Shaw intervened and they fled the scene." Santos looked at William with interest. "Mr. Shaw, is it? Can you walk me through what you saw?" For the next 20 minutes, William recounted the morning's events while Santos took detailed notes. She asked good questions, the kind that told William she had experience with human trafficking cases. When he described Dimitri's accent and the Russian he had heard, her expression became more serious. "Miss Wade," Santos said, turning to Crystal, "you mentioned you've been researching missing persons cases in the area. Can you tell me more about that?" Crystal straightened up, and William could see her shifting from victim to someone with important information to share. "I'm a criminal justice major, and I was working on a research project about trafficking patterns in rural communities. But it became personal when my roommate Jessica Williams disappeared 3 months ago." "Jessica Williams," Santos repeated, writing the name down. "Was a missing persons report filed?" "Yes, but the police said she was probably a runaway. Jessica was 23, had been in foster care, no family to speak of. She fit the profile of someone who might just disappear." Crystal's voice had an edge to it. But I knew Jessica. She wouldn't have left without telling me. She was working 2 jobs and saving money for nursing school. Santos nodded thoughtfully. What made you think her disappearance was connected to trafficking? The pattern, Crystal said. Over the past 18 months, 7 young women between 18 and 25 have disappeared from communities within a 100-mile radius of Vista Point. All of them were from vulnerable backgrounds, foster care, broken families, financial, in problems. None of them had strong support networks. William found himself impressed by Crystal's thoroughness. This wasn't casual research. She had been conducting a serious investigation. Where did you get this information? Santos asked. Public records, missing persons databases, newspaper archives. I also talked to people in the communities where these women lived. Family members, friends, employers. There's a pattern, Detective. These women didn't just run away. Santos closed her notebook and looked at Crystal with something approaching respect. Miss Wade, I think you and I need to have a longer conversation, but not here. She turned to William. Mr. Shaw, I'll need you to come to the station as well to give a formal statement. When? William asked, thinking about picking up Sage. From school. This afternoon would be good. Say 2 o'clock. William checked his watch. It was almost noon now, which would give him time to finish the morning's work and still make it to the station before Sage got out of school. I can do that. As the police cars pulled away, Frank Miller approached William with a concerned expression. Sure? You sure you're okay? That was some serious stuff that went down here. I'm fine, Frank. Thanks for letting me handle the police. Interviews on company time, Frank waved dismissively. Don't worry about that. I'm more concerned about these trafficking guys. You think they'll come back? William considered the question. In his experience, criminals like Dimitri didn't make idle threats. They had lost face this morning, and they would want to correct that situation. The question was when and how. I think we should be careful for a while, William said. Maybe have someone else work this site for a few days. You worried about them coming after you specifically? I'm worried about collateral damage, William said, which was true enough. If they do come back, I don't want any of your other workers getting caught in the middle. Frank nodded, understanding the logic. Take the rest of the day off. Get your statement done and make sure your daughter's okay. We'll figure out the work schedule tomorrow. William gathered his tools and headed home, but first he made a detour past Sage's school. He didn't get out of the truck, just drove slowly past the building, scanning for anything that looked out of place. 2 men in a car that didn't belong. A van parked where it shouldn't be. Anyone paying too much attention to the children. He saw nothing suspicious, but that didn't make him feel better. Professional traffickers wouldn't be obvious about surveillance, and Dimitri had struck him as someone who knew what he was doing. Back at the apartment, William found himself pacing restlessly. The small space that had felt like a refuge this morning now felt like a trap. He checked the locks on both the front door and the sliding door that led to their tiny balcony. He looked out the windows, memorizing which cars were parked on the street and making note of any that seemed out of place. His phone rang, making him jump slightly. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize. Hello? Mr. Shaw. The voice was female, professional. This is Lisa Parker from Child Protective Services. I wonder if we could schedule a time to talk. William's blood went cold. About what? We received a call this morning suggesting that you might be involved in some dangerous activities that could put your daughter at risk. I'd like to discuss the situation with you. William closed his eyes, understanding immediately what had happened. Dimitri had made good on his threat faster than expected, and he had chosen the most effective weapon possible against a single father. Miss Parker, William said carefully, I was involved in stopping an attempted kidnapping this morning. I gave a statement to the police. If someone called to suggest I was doing something that endangered my daughter, they were lying. I'm sure we can clear this up quickly, Parker said, but her tone suggested she was following protocol rather than expressing personal belief. Would you be available to meet tomorrow morning? I can meet with you, William said, but I want Detective Santos from the Vista Point Police Department to be present. She can verify exactly what happened this morning. There was a pause. That's unusual, Mr. Shaw. So is getting a false report called in by criminals who are angry that I interfered with their human trafficking operation. Another pause. I'll contact Detective Santos and see if we can arrange something. In the meantime, I want to be clear that this is just a preliminary inquiry. No decisions have been made about anything. After hanging up, William sat on his couch and tried to control the anger that was building in his chest. Dimitri was smart. Attacking William directly would have been risky and might not have been effective. But threatening his relationship with Sage hit him where he was most vulnerable. Ciao. Phone rang again. This time it was Crystal Wade. Mr. Shaw, I got your number from the police report. I wanted to thank you for this morning and also to warn you about something. What kind of warning? After I gave my statement, I went back to my apartment to get some of my research materials to show Detective Santos. Someone had been there. They didn't take anything obvious, but things were moved around. They were looking for something. William wasn't surprised. Are you somewhere safe now? I'm at the police station. Detective Santos suggested I stay here until she can arrange protective custody or something. But Mr. Shaw, there's something else. I think they're going to try to discredit you. They already started, William said, telling her about the CPS call. That's exactly what I was afraid of, Crystal said, when I was researching Jessica's disappearance. I talked to someone in Spokane whose sister had been taken by traffickers. When he tried to get the police to investigate, suddenly he was being investigated for tax evasion and child endangerment. These people have resources and connections. William absorbed this information, adding it to his growing understanding of what he was up against. This wasn't just a local criminal operation, it was something bigger and more sophisticated. Crystal, he said, what exactly did you find in your research? What made you such a threat to them that they came after you personally? I identified their recruitment pattern, she said. They're not just grabbing random women off the street. They have a systematic approach. Fake job offers, fake modeling agencies, fake educational opportunities. They target women who are isolated or desperate, and they do their homework first. What kind of homework? Background checks, financial records, family situations. They know which women won't be missed right away, and they know which ones can be manipulated through fear or economic pressure. Jessica got approached about a modeling opportunity 3 days before she disappeared. William felt a chill run down his spine. Crystal, have you shared this research with anyone else? Just you and Detective Santos. Why? Because if they were willing to grab you to stop your investigation, they might go after anyone else who has access to that information. There was silence on the other end of the line. Then Crystal said, Mr. Shaw, I need to ask you something. When you fought those men this morning, that wasn't just construction worker adrenaline. You moved like someone with military training, serious military training. William considered how much to tell her. I served in the Navy for 8 years. What did you do in the Navy? Classified, William said, which was technically true. Mr. Shaw, these people are dangerous. They have money, they have connections, and they're willing to hurt innocent people to protect their operation. If you're thinking about trying to fight them on your own, you need to know what you're up against. I'm not looking for a fight, William said. I just want to protect my daughter and get back to my normal life. I don't think that's going to be possible, Crystal said quietly. Not after this morning. They see you as a threat now, and they're not going to just forget about you." After Crystal hung up, William sat in his apartment, thinking about the situation he found himself in. 3 hours ago, his biggest worry had been making the rent payment. Now, he was dealing with human traffickers who had connections to social services and the resources to destroy his life systematically. He looked at the clock, 2:15 p.m. He needed to leave for the police station, and then he needed to pick up Sage from school. Tonight, he would have to figure out how to explain to a 12-year-old that their quiet life in Vista Point had just become a lot more complicated. But first, he needed to understand exactly what Crystal had discovered in her research, and he needed to know how much danger they were all in. Because one thing was becoming clear: this wasn't going to end with a police report and a warning to be careful. Dimitri had made this personal, and men like Dimitri didn't give up easily. William checked his watch again, grabbed his keys, and headed for the door. Detective Santos was waiting for him, and he had a feeling that what she had to tell him was going to change everything. The Vista Point Police Department occupied a modest brick building on Main Street that looked more like a small-town library than a law enforcement facility. William parked his truck and walked through the front doors at exactly 2 o'clock, his mind still processing the phone call from Child Protective Services and Crystal's warning about her ransacked apartment. Detective Santos met him in the lobby, holding a thick manila folder and wearing an expression that suggested she had been having a busy afternoon. "Mr. Shaw, thank you for coming in. We've got a lot to discuss." She led him to a small interview room with fluorescent lighting and a table that had seen better decades. William noticed that she left the door open, a sign that this was a cooperative conversation rather than an interrogation. "Before we start," Santos said, settling into her chair, "I want you to know that I've been working trafficking cases for 3 years. What happened this morning, and what Miss Wade has shared with me, suggests we're dealing with something much bigger than a local operation." William nodded. Crystal mentioned they might have connections to official agencies. Someone called CPS. "On me today." Santos's expression darkened. "What did they allege?" "That I was involved in dangerous activities that put my daughter at risk. The timing wasn't a coincidence." "No, it wasn't," Santos agreed. "These organizations are sophisticated. They don't just traffic people, they traffic information, influence, and fear. When someone threatens their operation, they respond systematically." She opened the folder and spread several photographs across the table. William recognized Dimitri from the morning's confrontation, but there were also photos of other men he didn't recognize. "This is Dmitry Volkov," Santos said, pointing to Dimitri's photo. "We've been trying to build a case against him for 8 months. He's the local lieutenant for a trafficking network that operates throughout the Pacific Northwest." "What you interrupted. This morning was a very expensive mistake for them." William studied the other photographs. "How expensive?" "Women like Crystal, educated, articulate, from stable backgrounds. They're worth a lot of money to the right buyers. Crystal wasn't chosen randomly. Her research made her a target, but her profile also made her valuable merchandise." The clinical way Santos discussed human trafficking didn't shock William. He had seen enough military briefings to understand that emotional distance was sometimes necessary when dealing with horrific subjects, but it reinforced his understanding of what Crystal had narrowly escaped. "Detective," William said, "I need to ask you something directly. How much danger is my daughter in?" Santos met his eyes without flinching. "Honestly, I don't know. These people are pragmatic. Going after a 12-year-old would bring heat they don't want, but they've already demonstrated they're willing to use official channels to pressure you." William absorbed this, thinking about the CPS appointment scheduled for tomorrow morning. "What do you suggest I do?" "Keep your daughter close. Vary your routines. Don't go anywhere alone if you can help it." Santos paused. "And maybe it's time to tell me more about your military background. William had been expecting this question. What makes you think there's more to tell? Because I watched the security footage from the building across the street from the construction site, Santos said. The way you moved, the way you assessed the situation, the way you neutralized multiple armed opponents, that's not civilian self-defense training. She pulled out a tablet and showed William grainy footage of the morning's confrontation. Watching himself fight was strange. He could see the automatic way he had positioned himself, the economy of movement, the tactical awareness that had guided every decision. 8 years in the Navy, William said finally. Doing what? William looked at the photos of Dmitri and his associates spread across the table. These men had threatened his daughter and disrupted his carefully constructed civilian life. They had forced his hand. Naval Special Warfare, he said. SEAL Team 3. Santos leaned back in her chair, and William could see her reassessing everything. About the morning's events. How long have you been out? 4 years. I came to Vista Point because it was quiet and nobody asked questions about my background. Why did you leave the military? This was the question William had been dreading. My last mission went bad. We lost 3 men, including my best friend. I couldn't handle the nightmares anymore, and I had a daughter to think about. Santos nodded, with understanding. PTSD, among other things. I spent 6 months in therapy before I was medically discharged. Coming to Vista Point was supposed to be a fresh start. Mr. Shaw, Santos said carefully, I'm going to ask you something and I want you to think about it before you answer. These traffickers aren't going to stop coming after you. They can't afford to let someone interfere with their operation and get away with it. Given your background, you might be the only person in this town who can actually stop them. William understood what she was really asking. You want me to help you build a case against them. I want you to help me shut them down completely. Crystal's research has given us their recruitment patterns. Your intervention this morning has disrupted their timeline. If we work together, we might be able to save a lot of women who would otherwise disappear. William thought about Sage, about the phone call from CPS, about the way Dmitri had looked at him through the van window. What would that involve? First, we need to keep Crystal safe while she helps us understand their full operation. Second, we need to document everything we can about their local network. Third, we need to be ready when they make their next move. And you think they will make another move? I'm certain of it, Santos said. They've invested too much in this area to just walk away. Plus, you and Crystal can both identify multiple members of their organization. They can't let that stand. William's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Sage's school. Mr. Sure, Sage is feeling sick and would like to go home early. Can you pick her up? The message was from a number he didn't recognize, and Sage's school always called rather than texted. William showed the message to Santos, who frowned as she read it. That's not from the school, she said immediately. That's bait. William was already standing up. I need to get to the school right now. I'm coming with you, Santos said, grabbing her jacket and radio, and we're calling for backup. They took Santos's unmarked car, with William giving directions, while she spoke rapidly into her radio, requesting units to respond to Vista Point Middle School. William checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. School didn't end until 3:15, so Sage should still be in her last period class. Call the school directly, Santos suggested as they drove. Make sure she's actually there. William dialed the main office number, his hands steadier than he felt. This is William Shaw, Sage Shaw's father. Someone sent me a text saying she was sick and needed to be picked up early. I wanted to verify that before I left work. There was a pause. Then the secretary came back on the line. Mr. Shaw, Sage is in her math class right now. We haven't sent any messages about her being sick. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, William said, relief flooding through him. I think I got a wrong number. Thanks for checking. Santos looked at him as he hung up. "She's safe. She's in class, but someone wanted me to think she wasn't. They were testing your response time," Santos said. "Seeing how quickly you'd react to a threat against your daughter. They're gathering intelligence." As they pulled up to the school, William could see 2 patrol cars already in the parking lot. Santos had called ahead and arranged for additional security, just in case the fake text message was cover for a real attempt. "Mr. Shaw," Santos said as they sat in the car watching the school building, "I need you to understand something. These people are escalating their campaign against you. The CPS call, the fake emergency with your daughter, this is psychological warfare. They're trying to break down your defenses and make you vulnerable." William watched a group of students walk past the car, laughing about something that seemed monumentally important to their teenage minds. What's their endgame? They want you isolated and discredited. If they can get your daughter taken away by social services, they eliminate your primary motivation for staying out of their business. If they can make you look like an unstable veteran with PTSD, they undermine your credibility with law enforcement. The school bell rang, and students began streaming out of the building. William spotted Sage immediately. She was walking with 2 friends, her backpack slung over one shoulder, looking perfectly normal and safe. "There she is," William said, pointing her out to Santos. "Good, now here's what we're going to do. You're going to pick her up like normal, but tonight you're not going home. I'm arranging for you to stay at a safe house until we can assess the full scope of the threat." William started to object, but Santos held up her hand. "This isn't optional, Mr. Shaw. These people have demonstrated they're willing to target your daughter. Until we shut down their operation, she's not safe in your regular routine." Sage had spotted William's truck and was walking toward them with a smile on her face. She looked so young and innocent that William felt a fierce protectiveness rise up in his chest. The same feeling that had made him intervene when he saw Crystal being attacked. "Detective," William said, "when you said you wanted my help shutting down their operation, what exactly did you have in mind?" "I'm going to need you to do what you do best," Santos said. "I need you to be a weapon." William watched his daughter approach the car, her face bright with the simple happiness of seeing him early. In that moment, he made a decision that he knew would change everything. "Okay," he said, "let's shut them down." But first, he had to figure out how to tell a 12-year-old that their life was about to become very different, and that her father was about to become someone she had never seen before. Santos was right about one thing. The Traffickers had made a mistake when they threatened Sage. They had awakened something in William that he had spent 4 years trying to keep buried. Now they were going to learn why that had been such a bad idea. The safe house was a modest ranch home on the outskirts of Vista Point, owned by a retired deputy sheriff who occasionally helped law enforcement with protective custody situations. William parked his truck in the attached garage while Detective Santos briefed the homeowner, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who had insisted on keeping a loaded shotgun by the front door. Sage had taken the sudden change in routine with the resilience that William both admired and worried about in his daughter. When he had explained that they needed to stay somewhere else for a few days because of his involvement in stopping the kidnapping attempt, she had simply nodded and asked if she could bring her homework. Now she was sitting at the kitchen table, working on a math assignment while William and Santos spread Crystal's research materials across the dining room table. Crystal herself was due to arrive within the hour, escorted by 2 patrol officers who would remain on site overnight. "This is impressive work," Santos said, studying Crystal's charts and timelines. "She's identified patterns that we missed in our investigation." William looked at the map Crystal had created, showing the locations where women had disappeared over the past 18 months. Vista Point was roughly in the center of a circle that encompassed communities throughout southern Idaho and eastern Oregon. They're using this area as a collection point, William observed. Small towns where disappearances don't get much attention, but close enough to major highways for transportation. That's what Crystal concluded too, Santos said. And look at this. She pointed to a timeline showing the dates of the disappearances. They're operating on a schedule. Every 6 to 8 weeks, someone vanishes. We're currently in week 7. Since the last disappearance, William understood the implication. They need to make up for losing Crystal, which means they're going to accelerate their timeline. They can't afford to miss their quota, especially after this morning's disruption. A car pulled into the driveway, and William automatically positioned himself where he could see both the front and back entrances to the house. Santos noticed his movement and nodded approvingly. "That's Crystal," she said, looking out the window. "The officers will do a perimeter check before bringing her in." 5 minutes later, Crystal entered the house flanked by 2 uniformed officers. She looked tired but determined, carrying a laptop bag and a box of additional research materials. "Mr. Sure," she said, seeing William at the table. "Detective Santos told me you've agreed to help with the investigation." "It's not much of a choice at this point," William said. "They made it personal when they threatened my daughter." Crystal set her laptop on the table and opened it, revealing a detailed spreadsheet with dozens of entries. "I've been working on this all afternoon with Detective Santos's help. We've cross-referenced missing persons reports with employment records, social media activity, and witness interviews." She clicked through several screens, showing William the scope of her research. "The pattern is more sophisticated than we initially thought. They're not just grabbing vulnerable women randomly, they're cultivating them over weeks or months." "What do you mean by cultivating?" William asked. "They create relationships," Crystal explained. "Fake job interviews, modeling opportunities, educational programs. They build trust first, gather information about the women's backgrounds and support systems, then move in when the target is most vulnerable." Santos leaned forward. Crystal found evidence that they have people embedded in legitimate businesses throughout the region. Employment agencies, photography studios, even some community colleges. William studied the data, his mind automatically shifting into tactical analysis mode. "This isn't just human trafficking, this is an intelligence operation." "Exactly," Crystal said, "and that's why I became a target. I wasn't just researching their past activities, I was getting close to identifying their current recruitment network." Sage looked up from her homework. "Dad, what's human trafficking?" The question caught William off guard. He had been so focused on the investigation that he had forgotten his daughter was listening to everything they discussed. "It's when bad people force other people to work for them against their will," William said carefully. Like modern slavery, Sage's expression became serious. "Is that what happened to the lady you helped this morning?" "Yes, sweetheart. That's exactly what we stopped from happening." "Are those people going to try to hurt you because you helped her?" William met his daughter's eyes, seeing both intelligence and concern there. "They might try, which is why we're staying here for a while. But I'm not going to let anything happen to you, okay?" Sage nodded solemnly, then returned to her homework. But William could see that she was processing more than math problems now. Crystal had been watching the exchange with interest. "Mr. Shaw, can I ask you something? When you served in the military, did you ever work on operations against human trafficking networks?" "Some," William said. "Mostly we focused on disrupting their funding and transportation routes. Why?" "Because I think what we're dealing with here is bigger than just a regional trafficking ring. The level of organization, the sophisticated recruitment methods, the connections to legitimate businesses, this feels like something with international backing." Santos pulled out a folder William hadn't seen before. "That's what we're starting to think too. We've requested assistance from federal agencies, but it could be weeks before they can assign resources to this." "We don't have weeks," William said. If they're operating on a 6 to 8 week schedule and they need to replace Crystal, they're going to move soon. That's why we need to force their hand, Santos said. Make them come to us on our terms, rather than waiting for them to choose. Their next victim. William understood what she was proposing. You want to use me as bait. I want to use all of us as bait, Santos corrected. Crystal's research has made her a continuing threat to their operation. You've demonstrated that you can interfere with their activities, and I'm the law enforcement officer trying to build a case against them. What exactly are you suggesting? Crystal opened another file on her laptop. I've identified what I think is their main collection facility. It's a warehouse complex about 20 miles outside of town, registered to a shell company that doesn't exist. She showed them satellite images of the facility, a cluster of buildings surrounded by high fences with limited access roads and clear sightlines in all directions. This is where they bring the women before transporting them out of the region, Crystal continued. I found shipping records that show regular truck traffic at odd hours and utility records that indicate much higher power usage than you'd expect for an empty warehouse. William studied the images with a professional eye. The facility was well chosen for its purpose, isolated enough to avoid casual observation, but with good transportation access. The security arrangements were competent but not military grade. How many people do we think are operating out of there? He asked. Based on employment records for the shell company, probably 8 to 12 on a regular basis, Santos said. But they could bring in additional personnel if they felt threatened. William did quick calculations in his head. Those were manageable numbers for a coordinated assault, especially if they had the element of surprise. But he was thinking like a SEAL again, and that kind of thinking led to the mission that had cost him 3 teammates and his military career. Detective, he said, if we're going to do this, we need to do it right. That means proper planning, backup, and coordination with federal agencies. I agree completely, Santos said. But first, we need solid evidence that the facility is actually being used for trafficking. We need to document what's happening there before we can get warrants or federal support. Crystal looked between William and Santos. You're talking about surveillance. Close surveillance, William confirmed, which means someone needs to get near that facility without being detected. Someone with military reconnaissance training, Santos added. William felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always came when he thought about returning to tactical operations. But he also thought about Sage doing her homework in the next room, and about Jessica Williams and the other women who had disappeared. I'll need detailed maps of the area, he said. Recent photographs, information about their security procedures, and a solid extraction plan if things go wrong. You'll have everything you need, Santos promised. And I want Jake Morrison involved, William continued. He's my former teammate, works private security now, and I trust him completely. Can you contact him without alerting the traffickers? To what we're planning, William nodded. Jake's good at staying below the radar. As they continued planning, William kept one eye on Sage, who had finished her homework and was now reading a book. She looked so peaceful and normal that it was hard to believe they were all in danger. But William had learned long ago that the most dangerous situations often looked completely ordinary from the outside. The key was staying alert, staying prepared, and never underestimating the people who wanted to hurt you. Tomorrow night, he would find out exactly what Dmitry Volkov's organization was capable of. And they would find out what happened when they threatened the wrong man's family. The warehouse surveillance would either give them the evidence they needed to shut down the trafficking network, or it would trigger a confrontation that would determine whether Vista Point remained under the control of criminals or was freed by people willing to fight for justice. Either way, William Shaw was done hiding from his past. Jake Morrison arrived at the safe house just after sunset, driving a nondescript sedan that could have belonged to any suburban commuter. William watched from the window as his former teammate approached. The house with the casual alertness that marked him as someone who had spent years in dangerous places. At 40, Jake still moved with the controlled precision of an active-duty SEAL, though his beard was grayer and his eyes held the particular weariness that came from too many private security contracts in unstable countries. "Trouble seems to follow you everywhere, brother," Jake said as William opened the door. His voice carried the easy familiarity of someone who had shared foxholes and bad decisions in equal measure. "This time it found me," William replied, leading Jake into the living room where Santos and Crystal were reviewing the latest surveillance photographs of the warehouse complex. Jake studied the images with professional interest, noting the site, lines, access points, and defensive positions automatically. "How many hostiles are we looking at?" "Best estimate is 8 to 12 at the facility," Santos said, "but they have the capability to bring in reinforcements quickly." "What's the mission objective?" Jake asked, settling into military briefing. "Mode. Primary objective is intelligence gathering," William said. "We need confirmation that they're holding victims at this location, documentation of their security procedures, and identification of key personnel." "Secondary objective," Jake prompted. William hesitated. "If we encounter hostages in immediate danger, we extract them." Jake nodded slowly. "Rules of engagement. We're operating under civilian law enforcement guidelines," Santos interjected. "This isn't a military operation." "Detective," Jake said carefully, "with respect, if these people are willing to traffic human beings and threaten children, they're not going to respect civilian rules of engagement. If Will and I go in there, we need to be prepared for them to shoot first and ask questions later." Santos looked uncomfortable with the direction the conversation was taking. "I can't officially authorize you to use lethal force." "Then don't," William said. "But understand that if they start shooting, we're going to shoot back." Crystal had been listening to the exchange with growing concern. "Maybe there's another way. What if I went in as bait, made contact with their recruitment network and let them take me to the facility?" "Absolutely not," William said immediately. "It would work," Crystal insisted. "I fit their target profile, and they already know I was investigating them. They'd probably consider it a bonus to recapture me. And if something goes wrong, you're dead or worse," Jake pointed out. "That's not a risk we can take." Sage appeared in the doorway, having finished the dinner that Mrs. Blackwood had prepared. "Dad, who's this?" "Sage, this is Jake Morrison. He's an old friend from the Navy." "Jake, this is my daughter Sage." Jake's expression softened immediately. "Pleased to meet you, Sage. Your dad used to tell us stories about you when we were deployed." "He did." Sage seemed pleased by this revelation, all the time. "He carried your picture everywhere and talked about how proud he was of you." William felt a familiar tightness in his throat. Jake was right. Even in the worst situations overseas, talking about Sage had been what kept him grounded and focused on why he was fighting. "Sage, why don't you go work on your reading assignment?" William suggested. "We're going to be discussing some grown-up stuff for a while." After Sage left, Jake's expression became serious again. "Will, I need to ask you something privately. Are you sure you're ready for this? I know what happened on that last mission, and I know how it affected you." William met his friend's eyes. "I don't have a choice, Jake. They threatened Sage. Everything else is secondary to keeping her safe." "That's what I'm worried about," Jake said. "You're emotionally compromised. That makes you dangerous to yourself and to anyone working with you." "I'm fine," William said, but even as he spoke the words, he could feel the old anxiety starting to build in his chest. Santos had been watching the exchange with interest. "What happened on your last mission?" William was quiet for a long moment, then began speaking in the flat, emotionless tone he had learned to use when discussing traumatic events with therapists. We were tasked with capturing a high-value target in Afghanistan. Intelligence said the compound was lightly defended. We went in expecting 8 to 10 hostiles and found 30. My team leader made the call to continue the mission instead of aborting. Jake picked up the story. 3 of our guys got caught in a crossfire when we tried to extract. Will went back for them, even though the position was overrun. I got 2 of them out, William continued, Marcus Rodriguez and Tommy Chen. But I couldn't reach David Palmer. I had to watch him bleed out from cover while enemy fighters stripped his gear and left his body in the courtyard. Crystal had gone very pale. How long ago was this? 4 years, 3 months, and 12 days, William said automatically. Santos leaned forward. Mr. Shaw, given what you've just told me, I'm not sure I can ask you to take this kind of risk. You're not asking, William said. I'm volunteering, and Jake's right. I am emotionally compromised, but that's what's going to make me effective. Against these people. They hurt innocent women, they threatened my daughter, and they think I'm going to back down. They're wrong. Jake studied his friend's face for several seconds, then nodded slowly. Okay, if we're doing this, we do it right. Full reconnaissance, detailed planning, and multiple contingencies. They spent the next 2 hours going over satellite images, street maps, and building layouts that Crystal had obtained through public records. The warehouse facility was located in an industrial area that had seen better decades, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned buildings that would provide good concealment for their approach. Security cameras here, here, and here, Jake said, marking the images with a red pen. Motion sensors along the perimeter fence, at least 2 roving patrols based on the wear patterns in the gravel. Guard positions at the main gate and the loading dock, William added. Probably armed response teams inside the main building. Crystal pointed to a smaller structure behind the main warehouse. This building shows the highest electrical usage. If they're holding people, that's probably where. How do we get close enough to confirm without triggering their security? Santos asked. We don't, William said. We trigger it deliberately and use their response to map their defensive positions. Jake smiled grimly. False flag operation. Make them think they're dealing with a small-time break-in. Document their reaction, then withdraw and plan the real approach. That's risky, Santos warned. Everything about this is risky, William replied. But sitting around waiting for them to make the next move is riskier. Crystal closed her laptop and looked at the 2 men who were calmly discussing tactics for infiltrating a criminal stronghold. You 2 are really going to do this, aren't you? Tomorrow night, William confirmed. New moon, which means minimal ambient light. Weather forecast shows overcast skies, which is even better for concealment. What do you need from me? Santos asked. Communication support, Jake said, and a fast response team if things go sideways. And if you find evidence of hostages being held at the facility, then we call in federal resources and coordinate a full-scale rescue operation, William said. But first, we need to know what we're dealing with. Santos nodded, but William could see she was uncomfortable with the unofficial nature of what they were planning. I want to be clear that this is outside normal police procedures. Detective, Jake said, normal police procedures don't work. Against people who have connections inside government agencies and the resources to disappear anyone who threatens them. After Jake and Santos left to make final preparations, William sat in the kitchen with Crystal, while Sage worked on homework in the living room. The house was quiet except for the occasional sound of Mrs. Blackwood moving around in her room. Mr. Sure, Crystal said. Can I ask you something personal? Sure. When you went back for your teammates in Afghanistan, knowing you might not make it out, what made you do that? William considered the question. They were my responsibility. When you're part of a team, you don't leave people behind. Ever. Even If it means risking your own life, especially then, the moment you start calculating personal risk against doing the right thing, you've already lost what makes you worth saving. Crystal was quiet for a moment. Is that how you see this situation, with me and the other women who've been taken? Yes, William said simply. These people took your roommate. They were going to take you. They're planning to take others. That makes stopping them my responsibility, even though you have Sage to think about. William looked through the doorway at his daughter, who was bent over her textbook with complete concentration. Especially because I have Sage to think about. I want her to grow up in a world where good people stand up to evil people. If I don't do that myself, how can I expect her to? Crystal nodded slowly. I understand now why you went back for your teammates. The difference is, this time I'm not leaving anyone behind, William said. Not you, not the women in that warehouse, not the future victims they're planning to take. Tomorrow night, William Shaw would find out if 4 years of civilian life had dulled his edge, or if the skills that had made him one of the military's most effective operators were still there when he needed them. Either way, Dmitry Volkov's trafficking network was about to discover that threatening a SEAL's family was the last mistake they would ever make. The warehouse complex looked different through night vision goggles. What had appeared as a simple industrial facility in the daylight photographs now revealed itself as a carefully designed fortress. William lay prone behind a concrete barrier 200 yards from the perimeter fence, studying the movement patterns of the guards while Jake monitored radio communications from their concealed position. 2-man patrol every 18 minutes, William whispered into his headset. Motion sensors are active on the east and south sides, but there's a blind spot near the northwest corner where the fence meets that old drainage ditch. Copy that. Santos's voice came through their earpieces. Federal backup is standing by 5 miles out. What's your assessment of hostage presence? Jake adjusted his position to get a better view of the smaller building Crystal had identified. Thermal imaging shows at least 6 people in the rear structure. Minimal movement, which is consistent with restraint. William felt the familiar combination of focus and controlled aggression that had carried him through dozens of similar operations. But this time was different. This time he wasn't following orders from distant commanders who saw objectives on a map rather than human. Lives in the balance. Movement at the main entrance, Jake reported. 3 vehicles approaching. William shifted his scope to track the incoming cars, 2 black SUVs and a panel van. As they passed through the gate, he could see armed men in the front seats and movement in the rear compartments that suggested they weren't empty. They're bringing in more victims, William said, and something cold settled in his stomach. We can't wait for federal backup. We'll stick to the mission, Jake warned. Intelligence gathering only. But William was already moving, low crawling toward the fence line while keeping to the shadows cast by abandoned machinery. Behind him, he could hear Jake cursing softly before following. The northwest approach was exactly as they had mapped it. A 50-yard stretch where the security cameras couldn't overlap and the motion sensors had been positioned to cover vehicle approaches rather than foot infiltration. William reached the fence and began cutting through the chain link with wire cutters, creating an opening just large enough for a person to squeeze through. In position, he whispered. Jake, maintain. Overwatch and be ready to call in the cavalry. Negative, I'm coming with you, Jake replied, already moving toward the fence. William was about to argue when he heard something that made his blood freeze. A woman's voice, muffled but clearly audible, crying for help from inside the smaller building. That's it, William said. We're going in. They moved through the fence opening and across the open ground between the perimeter and the buildings, using the shadows and their knowledge of the guard patrol routes to avoid detection. William felt his training taking over completely now. 4 years of civilian life falling away as muscle memory and tactical instincts guided every movement. The smaller building had 2 entrances, a main door facing the warehouse and a service entrance on the side facing away from the guard posts. William and Jake approached the service door, with William checking for alarms while Jake watched their 6. Doors wired but not sophisticated. William whispered, "I can bypass it." 3 minutes later, they were inside a narrow hallway that smelled of fear and industrial disinfectant. Voices were coming from rooms deeper in the building, men speaking in Russian and English, and women's voices responding with various accents and languages. William moved forward with Jake covering. Both men armed with weapons Santos had provided from the police department's tactical unit. As they reached the first door, William could hear a conversation that made his jaw clench with rage. "The new ones will need to be processed quickly," a man was saying in accented English. "The schedule has been moved up because of the problems in town." "What about the one who was investigating?" another voice asked. "Dmitri is handling that personally. She will be brought here tonight, along with the man who interfered and his daughter." William's vision went red around the edges. They weren't just planning to take Crystal again, they were planning to take Sage. Jake grabbed his arm, sensing the change in his friend's demeanor. "Easy, brother. We need to be smart about this." William nodded, forcing himself back into operational mode. They continued down the hallway, passing 3 rooms where they could see women being held in deplorable conditions. The victims appeared to range in age from late teens to mid-20s, and all showed signs of being drugged or otherwise coerced into compliance. 8 hostages confirmed, William whispered into his radio, requesting immediate federal backup. 15 minutes out, Santos responded. "Can you maintain position until then?" "Negative," William said as footsteps approached from the main corridor. "We're about to be compromised." 2 guards rounded the corner, automatic weapons in their hands. William and Jake moved simultaneously, William taking the closer guard with a chokehold that rendered him unconscious within seconds, while Jake disarmed the second man and zip-tied his hands behind his back. "So much for stealth," Jake muttered. Alarms began blaring throughout the complex, and they could hear shouting from the main warehouse as armed men mobilized to respond to the intrusion. William began moving from room to room, cutting the restraints that held the trafficking victims, while Jake covered the hallway. "Can you walk?" William asked the first woman he freed, a blonde girl who couldn't have been more than 19. I think so," she said in a shaky voice. "They drugged us, but it's wearing off." "What's your name?" "Jessica Williams." William's breath caught. This was Crystal's roommate, the woman whose disappearance had started the entire investigation. "Jessica, we're here to get you out. Crystal Wade sent us." Recognition flared in Jessica's eyes. "Crystal, is she okay?" "She's safe. Now we need to get you and the others out of here." William continued freeing the hostages while Jake held the hallway against increasing numbers of armed traffickers. The sound of gunfire was echoing through the building now, and William knew they had minutes, at most, before being overrun. "Jake, we need to move these women now," William called out. "Working on it," Jake replied, firing controlled bursts at the advancing guards. "But we've got company coming from both directions." William made a rapid tactical assessment. 8 hostages, all weakened by drugs and psychological trauma, 2 operators against at least a dozen armed hostiles. No immediate backup. It was exactly the kind of situation that had gone wrong in Afghanistan. "Jessica," William said, "can you help the other women move? We need to get everyone to the service door." "Yes," Jessica said, and William could see strength returning to her voice as she realized rescue was actually happening. As the women began moving toward the exit, William took position alongside Jake in the hallway. The traffickers were advancing more cautiously now, having realized they were dealing with professionals rather than amateur do-gooders. "Federal agents, this is FBI," a voice shouted from outside the building. "You are surrounded." The gunfire slackened momentarily as the traffickers processed this new development. William used the distraction to move the hostages toward the service door, but as they reached the exit, Dmitry Volkov appeared with 2 armed men. "Going somewhere?" Dmitry asked, his weapon trained on Jessica. William found himself facing the man who had threatened his daughter, and all the rage and protective fury he had been controlling finally had a target. But between him and Dmitry were 8 innocent women who would die if this turned into a firefight. "Let them go," William said. "Your fight is with me." "My fight is with anyone who costs me money," Dmitry replied. "You have caused me considerable expense, Mr. Shaw. Former Navy SEAL, yes? Very impressive credentials." "How do you know that?" Dmitry smiled coldly. "We know everything about you. Where you live, where your daughter goes to school, what time she walks home every day. Did you really think you could interfere with our business without consequences?" William felt Jake tense beside him, but they were outnumbered and outgunned, with civilians in the line of fire. Any move they made would result in hostage deaths. "What do you want?" William asked. "Simple. You and your friend drop your weapons. And these women live. You continue to interfere with our operations, and your daughter joins our inventory." The threat against Sage was the final straw. William had spent 4 years running from the darkness that military service had put inside him, but Dmitry had just awakened something that no amount of therapy or civilian life could contain. "Okay," William said, slowly lowering his weapon. "You win." But as he bent down to place his gun on the floor, William was calculating angles, distances, and reaction times. Jake, reading his longtime teammate's body language, was doing the same. When William moved, it was with the lethal precision that had made him one of the most effective operators the SEALs had ever produced. Dmitry's first shot went wide as William tackled him, while Jake eliminated the 2 guards with controlled pairs that dropped both men before they could return fire. The fight with Dmitry was brief and vicious. The trafficker was strong and experienced, but William was fighting for his daughter's life and the lives of 8 innocent women. When it ended, Dmitry was unconscious and zip-tied on the floor. "Federal agents, show me your hands." The voice came from multiple directions as FBI tactical teams flooded the building. "Friendlies," Jake called out. 2 operators with 8 hostages, all clear." As federal agents secured the scene and began processing the rescued women, William sat against the wall and tried to process what had just happened. For the first time in 4 years, he had been in combat, and everyone on his side had survived. "You okay?" Jake asked, settling beside him. "Better than okay," William said. "For the first time since Afghanistan, I remembered why I became a SEAL. In the first place, Detective Santos appeared with a federal agent who introduced himself as Agent Foster. "Mr. Shaw, the hostages are all safe, and the trafficking network has been dismantled. We recovered enough evidence to put these people away for life." "What about Sage?" William asked. "Safe at the house with Mrs. Blackwood," Santos assured him. "And Child Protective Services has dropped their investigation after reviewing the facts of the case." Agent Foster looked at William with professional curiosity. "Mr. Shaw, I understand you've been out of the military for 4 years. Have you ever considered returning to federal service? We could use people with your skills and your commitment to protecting innocent lives." William thought about the question as he watched Jessica Williams reuniting with Crystal in the parking lot outside. He thought about Sage waiting for him at the safe house, and about the quiet life in Vista Point that had been permanently changed by the events of the past week. "Thanks," William said, "but I've got everything I need right here." 6 months later, William Shaw was running a security consulting business in Vista Point, helping law enforcement agencies throughout the region develop tactics for dealing with human trafficking networks. Jake Morrison had moved to Idaho to become his business partner, and Crystal Wade was finishing her criminal justice degree while working part-time as a victim's advocate. Sage Shaw was thriving in 8th grade, proud of her father's work and unaware that she had come closer to danger than she would ever know. And on quiet evenings, when the mountains around Vista Point were painted purple by the sunset, William would sit on his porch and reflect on the strange way that running from your past sometimes leads you exactly where you need to be. The nightmares about Afghanistan had finally stopped. They had been replaced by dreams about the future. The end. Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss this. Just click to watch. And don't forget to subscribe. It would mean a lot.